this week's Parsha and next week's Parsha. This week's Parsha Vayetze in particular. We'll focus on next week's Parsha more next week. But they really are part of one whole because they contain the story of Jacob and his dreams and his anxieties and fears and really the development of Jacob's life. And it's a fair question for Jews to ask if you want, to ask why Jacob is the namesake of our people. We're not called the people of Abraham. We're not called the people of Isaac. We are called the people of Israel. And Israel is the name, as we know, that Jacob takes on next week during the second dream that he has, this week being the first dream. And it's a fair question. Why not be called the people of Moses, the people of Isaiah or Ezekiel or Zechariah? You get the point. Why Jacob? Why Yaakov? Does anyone know? Do you have an understanding or an idea of why it's Jacob, why we are the people of Israel and not the people of Moses, for example? This is the group participation section of tonight's Devar Torah. You want to take a guess as to why we're the people of Jacob, Israel?
He was the father of 12 tribes.
An obvious answer is he is the father of 10 of the 12 tribes and the grandfather of Ephraim and Manasseh, who were 2 of them. Yes, he has lots of kids and lots of tribes. That is a fair answer. But I could argue Abraham had kids, Isaac had kids, he didn't have 12. Maybe we should have just had 1 tribe, or 2 tribes, or 3 tribes. But that is an obvious answer, yes. Are there any other? Yes, meaning and. Oh, I'll wait, people. I got nowhere to go. Because he became a believer through his dreams. And specifically, what kind of believer? Like, what does he start to believe through his dreams that maybe he hadn't believed before? He grows in spirit, right? He believes in God. He begins to know God. Okay. Abraham knows God. Isaac knows God. It's a fair answer. What's different about his growth, if you will? He started at a lower level, which was very, very accurate, yes. I mean, last week he's stealing birthrights and manipulating his father and lying to his father and ganging up on his brother and stealing, so he definitely, we don't hear that about Abraham and Isaac. We don't hear about, so what is it about Jacob then that's different than Abraham and Isaac? Through what we learned in last week's Parsha. I know Rabbi Keller focused on the wells. Yes. He did that very well. Rabbi Sharf, thank you, sir. He's the most like us. We spend so much time idealizing our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that we lose any perspective on how flawed each of them were. And Jacob, as Steve mentioned in this sort of spiritual development answer, was the most flawed. He was the most like us. Now, I'm not here to beat up on us, but I'm here to tell you that we ain't perfect, people. We make lots of mistakes, and we tell lots of lies to ourselves, and we manipulate people all the time. And so while we like to spend time idealizing these people, I think it's more important when we look at Jacob to talk about how much like us he was. And the one thing that Jacob does, the one thing of many, that is most human, is he is scared. He's someone who runs away a lot. So last week, at the end of the Parsha, he runs away because Esau finds out that he switcherooed the blessings from Isaac. So he runs away. Next week's Parsha, he runs away from Laban's house, and then he runs away from confronting Esau, and then he finally confronts Esau. Later on in next week's Parsha, when his sons, Simeon and Levi, go and pillage an entire town for the rape of Dinah, as a response for the rape of their sister Dinah, he kind of goes into hiding. He retreats. He's a retreater. He's a scared person. But in this Parsha, there's something very important, and we see how he uses that fear to live with that fear, but not in it. How he learns, like many of us struggle to in our lives, to live with our anxiety, to live with our fear, not in it. We're all anxious, we all have anxieties, we all have fears, but we have a choice to make every single day, which is, do we live in it or do we live with it? And from Jacob, we learn leadership. This week's Parsha, we know the story. We know the story of the ladder ascending to heaven. Jacob lays his head down. It's nighttime. From that, the rabbis say this is the proof text for the evening service, for the Ma'ariv service, because it says that Jacob lays down at night. The rabbis wanted all of our three services to come from our ancestors. So they took the verse where Abraham, this is a side note, by the way, a fruitful aside. When Abraham woke up early in the morning to saddle his donkey to go to the Akedah, they say that was the first davening of the Shacharit, the morning service. When Isaac is hanging out, dwelling, walking around, meditating in the sunshine of the afternoon, the rabbis say that is the proof text of the Mincha, the afternoon service. And in this week's Parsha, when Jacob lays down at night and has his dream, that is the Ma'ariv service, the evening service. It works out very well for the rabbis, and I thought I'd share that with you just in case it comes up in Trivial Pursuit. It seems, though, that in this Parsha, this dream of the ladder becomes much more profound than we think. We know that Jacob has a dream where he sees a stairway to heaven, a sulam, a ladder to heaven, with its top reaching up to the heavens, and he sees these angels of God ascending and descending on it. And the Torah tells us that when he awoke from his sleep, he said, Achein yesh Adonai, b'makom hazeh v'anochi lo yadati. Behold, or wow, or what did you say yesterday, Eli? Woohoo! God was in this place, and I did not know it. And that is the moment, as Steve said in his answer, this is his moment of transcendence. It's his moment of epiphany. It's the moment when he realizes one very important part of living with fear, not in fear, which is, I am not alone. I am not the only one. I have God beside me. So that's one indication that this dream of the angels ascending and descending teaches him, as he wakes up and says, God is in this place and I did not know it, one of his signs that he's going to be a good leader, someone worthy of us being named for, because he understands what it means to see God. In next week's Parsha, and to recognize that he's not alone. In next week's Parsha, as he escapes, leaves, retreats from Lavan, he has another anxiety dream, because he hears that Esau is waiting to meet him. It's 20 years later, he's freaking out. Esau's got a lot of men with him. And if you remember in that dream, in next week's dream, he has a wrestling match, a fight with an angel. Another angel appears, and the angel renames him as part of a long process where Jacob is beating up on the angel pretty good, and the angel, who is nocturnal, needs to leave and says, I need to leave. And Jacob says, you can't leave until you bless me. And he says, your name will no longer be, the blessing is, it will no longer be Jacob, it will be Israel, one who wrestles with God or wrestles with divine creatures and prevails. So there are two encounters this week and next week, and they are really part of a whole, where Jacob, in these moments of what Rabbi Keller is so fond of calling and using this term, liminal space, spaces where Jacob is neither here nor there, but he is sort of in a spiritual emptiness, threshold, right? A liminal space is a threshold where you're neither in one place or another, but you're sort of transitioning. He's in that liminal space, the space between that is neither the starting point nor the destination, at a time in both places where he has choices to make. Should he continue retreating and live in his fear and anxieties, or should he lead, become worthy of being Yisrael, someone who takes on those fears and those anxieties and deals with them? They're decisive spiritual encounters in his life. and they happen in that liminal space. So here's what Jacob bequeaths to us. In these two dreams, with his anxieties and his fears and his instinct to run away, his instinct to disappear. Most of the expatriates, I shouldn't say this, I will. When you see a lot of Americans make aliyah to Israel or emigrate, leave the country and go move somewhere else, they are typically, whether they know it or not always, but sometimes. I went from typically to sometimes, because this is being live streamed and it will be recorded, running away from something or someone. When a child moves as far away on the other side of the country as they can from where their parents live, it's not just for a job. Typically, and in many cases, we are running away from something. That is, you're laughing, but that's what Jacob does. By the way, that's what we do. We do that too. Jacob's just the same as us. He has that impulse. Does he take that impulse or not? But what's remarkable about Jacob is that he's a survivor. He has real threats. His brother Esau is a real threat, not a perceived one. Right? Going up and living with Laban. Read a little bit about Laban. Laban is a real threat. His father-in-law is a real threat. Right? He switcheroos Leah with Rachel. He manipulates Jacob. He takes advantage of him. He's a real threat. Esau is a real threat. Going home is a real threat. These are real threats. But from Jacob, we learn what it means to be a survivor. The people of Israel have faced real threats since the beginning of our existence. We have. Jews have faced in our history, for example, the destruction of two temples, the conquering of the Babylonian Empire and the Roman Empire, the expulsions, the persecutions, the pogroms of the Middle Ages, the rise of anti-Semitism in the 19th century in Europe, and of course the Holocaust. Each cataclysmic event, we've had to make a choice. Our people has had to make a choice. Do we run away and no longer be Jewish? Or do we live with the fear that there are people who really hate us, who really want us dead, and go on living as Jews? And you see the connection in these two dreams that Jacob has and the choices that he makes, and the very, this week, example of what it means to be the people of Israel, to be living with the fear and the knowledge that there are people really who want us really dead, who want us gone. And so we have decisions to make, just like Jacob did. If you think about it for a second, it's kind of haunting that in a week that we experienced what happened in Paris last week. I was driving up to camp. I listened to the news as it was developing my whole drive up to camp. It was kind of nice to be at camp and be away from all the televisions and electronic devices, but I couldn't help but see what was going on and try to catch up with it. We saw what happened in Israel this week. I mean, there's terrorism in Israel every single day. People are canceling their trips to Israel next summer, which I think is, I want to tell you, I think it's absurd. No Christians are canceling their trips to Israel next summer. Not one Christian group is canceling a trip to Israel. It's only the Jews that are canceling their trips. Go to Israel. Live with your fear, not in it. I know that sounds judgy, but I'm a rabbi, that's my job. The question that I have for you on this Shabbat, however, in leadership, in matters of leadership, and especially in matters of spirit, we learn from Jacob something very valuable. The ability to survive and recover, to survive a trauma and to recover is part of what it takes to be a leader, part of what it means to be a Jew. It is the willingness to live a life that risks even our own lives at times that makes us, as individual Jews, as descendants of Jacob, different, unique from others. Theodore Roosevelt, in one of his greatest speeches that he gave, former President of the United States, said, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who, at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat." This was Jacob. Roosevelt, it could have been, had he not lived 2,000 years, 3,000 years later, could have been describing Jacob. Jacob endured real threats. Jacob endured sibling rivalry that could have ended in his death. He had a father-in-law who was horrible to him. He had tension with his wives and their children. There was conflict. But he was a survivor. He knew what it meant to live with fear and anxiety and not in it. And the Talmud says that it is for the following reason. One who acts from love is greater than one who acts from fear. Jacob knew intuitively that to live in fear would be to live without love. But to live with fear would make him capable of living with love, to allow the love of what could be, not the fear of what is, to prevail. And so if we go back to the first question, why we are the children of Israel, why we are named for Jacob, it is because he was really real. He was just like us. But if you look around you now and you listen to the news and read the editorial pages and see what our quote-unquote leaders are sharing, it is filled with anger and fear. The kind of anger that comes from fear and fear-mongering becomes hate. Leadership means, whether it's in respect to being Jews and looking at our history, or being Americans and looking at where we are right now, leadership for us as Jews means that you, like Jacob, overcome your fear, that you live with it, so that, as the Talmud teaches us, that we can live and act from love. Fear does not lead to love. It leads to hate. Jacob endures all of these fears, and now we learn the answer that we are named for him, because from him we learn to try, to fail, to fear, but to keep on going and doing the right thing. That is what it means to be a Jew. That is what it means to be part of the people of Israel. Shabbat shalom.